All right, so today we're gonna dive into some pretty heavy stuff.
Okay.
Um, Looking into the case of Dorothy Williams,
Oh, wow.
an American serial killer.
Yeah.
And you guys have sent in some seriously intense material on her.
Wow.
So our goal today is to try and uncover all the key facts and insights we can about her life and crimes.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So you ready to unpack this?
Absolutely.
This is one of those stories where addiction just fueled some truly horrific acts.
Yeah, it's certainly a case that grabs your attention for sure.
Yeah, and trying to understand what leads someone down such a dark path, especially when you bring addiction into it,
Right.
it's a challenge.
Absolutely. It's like a puzzle where you're missing some of the pieces
Exactly.
and you're just trying to figure out, what happened and what went wrong.
Yeah, so let's start with just some background on Dorothy Williams.
Okay.
She was born in Illinois in 1954,
Okay.
became a mother of two,
Okay.
but things took a dark turn when she got hooked on heroin.
Well, yeah, and I mean heroin addiction, especially, in the 70s and 80s,
Right.
it was very, very rampant, and that drug is very addictive.
Yeah.
So, once you get hooked, it's very difficult to break free and often leads people to do some pretty desperate things to obtain it.
Yeah, and it seems like that desperation that you're talking about really played a significant role in Williams' crimes.
Right.
Between 1987 and 1989, she targeted elderly individuals in Illinois, committing a series of robberies and murders.
Oh, wow.
It's chilling.
Yeah, it's a stark reminder of how vulnerable older adults are.
Right.
And,
Yeah.
they can be seen as easy targets, especially for someone who's desperate for money to fuel their addiction.
Yeah, her first victim was in December of 1987.
Okay.
She strangled 79-year-old Lonnie Laws.
Oh, my gosh.
It's just heartbreaking.
Absolutely. And tragically, the violence escalated from there.
Oh, no.
In 1988, she stabbed 64-year-old Caesar Zarell to death.
Oh, wow. So it just kept getting worse.
Yeah.
And then in July of 89, she strangled 97-year-old Mary Harris.
Oh, my goodness.
Banging.
So this pattern of escalating violence is
Oh, wow.
something that we do sometimes see with individuals who are struggling with addiction.
Really?
As their need for the drug increases, their inhibitions decrease.
Wow.
And that can lead to more impulsive and violent acts.
Right.
It's a grim reality, unfortunately.
Yeah, it's scary.
It is.
So 3 lives tragically cut short,
Yeah.
each one more brutal than the last.
Yeah.
It's hard to believe that someone could do this,
Right.
especially a mother.
Yeah.
Thankfully, though, Williams was captured and convicted in 1989.
Okay.
They caught her just a month after Mary Harris was killed.
Oh, wow. So that was a quick apprehension.
Yeah.
And that just goes to show how much resources and effort law enforcement puts into catching serial offenders. These cases often become a top priority because of the potential for continued violence.
And in this case, it meant preventing more potential victims.
Exactly.
So now the justice system has to figure out how to handle a case as severe as this one. So Williams was initially sentenced to death.
Wow. So that sentence, reflects the severity of these crimes, particularly during that period in the U.S.
Yeah.
The death penalty was much more commonly used.
Right.
So that was kind of the go-to sentence for these really heinous crimes.
Yeah.
So it was a different time back then.
For sure.
And the views on capital punishment were quite different.
Yeah. Wow, the death penalty.
Yeah.
That's a whole other can of worms.
It is.
But things took a huge turn in 2003.
Okay.
Then Illinois Governor George Ryan,
Okay.
he commuted all death sentences in the state.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
This was a pivotal moment in Illinois' history.
Yeah.
Governor Ryan, he was a Republican,
Right.
but he expressed these deep concerns about the state's capital punishment system
Okay.
and cited, the potential for wrongful convictions.
Oh, wow.
And so his decision really sparked this nationwide debate
Yeah.
about the death penalty.
It's like it wasn't just about one case anymore.
Exactly.
It was about the system as a whole.
It really brought the issue to the forefront.
So what were some of the flaws that he saw in the system?
Well, he pointed to several factors.
Okay.
One was the reliance on eyewitness testimony,
Right.
which research has shown can be unreliable.
Yep.
Another was the issue of inadequate legal representation for defendants,
Right.
especially those from low-income backgrounds.
Of course.
And he also highlighted the racial disparities
Right.
that were present in sentencing.
Yeah, it's almost like he was saying the system itself was setting people up to fail.
His concerns definitely resonated with a lot of people.
Yeah.
And, this decision to commute all those death sentences, it really brought those flaws into the light.
Wow. So instead of facing execution,
Right.
Dorothy Williams' sentence was changed to life in prison without parole.
That's right.
Okay, so that shift, That kind of highlights that ongoing debate about punishment versus rehabilitation
Absolutely.
in the justice system.
Is the goal to just punish the crime?
Right.
Or is there a responsibility to try and rehabilitate individuals?
Yeah, that is the question.
It's a tough one.
It is.
There's strong arguments on both sides.
Yeah, speaking of different perspectives,
Okay.
you mentioned that Dorothy Williams' case was featured on that TV show Deadly Women.
Yes, it was in an episode titled Death Knock.
Okay, Death Knock. Cool.
Yeah, and true crime shows, those are really popular these days.
Oh, they're huge.
Yeah, why do you think people are so drawn to them?
I don't know. I think it's because it offers this, glimpse into this darker side of humanity.
Right.
Like a peek behind the curtain of these seemingly normal lives.
Right. It's sort of like a morbid curiosity.
Yeah.
But it's important to remember that these shows are meant to entertain.
Right.
And they don't always give, a comprehensive or balanced view
Oh, for sure.
of the cases that they portray.
Yeah, it's easy to get caught up in the drama of it all and forget that these are real people
Exactly.
and complex circumstances behind these stories.
Absolutely. So in Dorothy Williams's case, it's important to consider all these different aspects.
Right.
We have the impact of eviction,
Right.
the vulnerability of the victims.
Yeah.
Then you have the ethical dilemmas
Right.
surrounding the death penalty.
It's not a simple story.
Not at all.
No. And it seems like addiction plays this major role in all of this.
It does.
We know that Williams was hooked on heroin.
Right.
But how deep did that go?
Well-
Did her addiction come up at all during her trial?
It did.
Yeah, really?
Yeah, her defense attorneys argued that it was a mitigating factor
Okay.
in her crimes.
Interesting.
Essentially they were arguing that her need for heroin
Right.
drove her to commit these acts,
Wow.
that it impaired her judgment and her self-control.
So they were saying that addiction kind of lessened her responsibility
Exactly.
for her actions.
They weren't trying to excuse the crimes,
Right.
but they were trying to provide context
Okay.
and explain, the desperation that can fuel an addict's behavior.
Yeah. That must have been a tough argument to make.
It was.
How did the prosecution respond to that?
Well, they acknowledged the impact of addiction,
Okay.
but they emphasized that, it didn't absolve her of
Right.
her responsibility for
Right.
the murders.
But
They argued that she still made conscious choices.
even under the influence.
Right, even under the influence of drugs.
Wow.
And that those choices had devastating consequences for
Wow.
the victims and their families.
It's a really complex situation.
It is.
So the court had to basically weigh her addiction against the severity of the crimes.
Exactly. And ultimately, the court found her guilty of murder
Okay.
and sentenced her to death.
Right.
But of course, with Governor Ryan's later commutation,
Yeah.
that sentence was changed to life in prison.
Right. So even though addiction was considered,
Yes.
it wasn't enough to completely excuse her
Right.
from the consequences.
This case really illustrates how the justice system doesn't always have simple answers. It grapples with these really difficult questions
Right.
about individual accountability,
Of course.
the impact of addiction,
Right.
and the appropriate punishment for these heinous crimes.
Yeah, it's like trying to solve an equation with too many variables.
Exactly.
There are legal considerations, moral dilemmas, and then the human element.
Right.
It's all kind of intertwined.
It is a very complex situation for sure.
It really highlights how there's never a simple answer
Right.
when it comes to these cases.
It's complicated.
Yeah. But going back to the addiction for a moment,
Okay.
did Dorothy Williams ever receive any treatment
Yeah.
for her heroin addiction?
Yeah, there's documentation that she did receive some treatment while in prison.
Okay.
Correctional facilities offer a variety of substance abuse programs.
Right.
Recognizing that addiction is very prevalent among inmates.
So even though she was behind bars, there were still efforts made to try and address her addiction.
Exactly.
That's a good thing, right?
It is. Addressing addiction within the prison system is really important, not only for the well-being of the individual,
Right.
but also for reducing the likelihood that they'll, reoffend
Right.
once they're released.
It makes sense. If someone's underlying issues aren't addressed,
Right.
they're more likely to fall back into those old patterns.
Exactly.
Do we know anything about how she responded to the treatment?
Unfortunately, the specifics about her treatment and how effective it was
Right.
aren't really available.
Okay.
Prison records often have limitations
Right.
in terms of what information they'll release publicly.
It's frustrating that some of those pieces of the puzzle are missing.
Yeah.
It makes it hard to fully understand
It does.
the scope of her struggles.
Right.
And whether she had any chance of really turning her life around.
It speaks to the larger issue of the stigma that surrounds addiction.
Right.
People often view it as a moral failing
Right.
rather than a complex medical condition that requires, ongoing treatment and support.
And that stigma that you're talking about
Yeah,
can definitely prevent people from seeking help
absolutely.
in the first place.
It creates a vicious cycle.
Yeah. So I want to shift gears just a little bit.
Okay.
I want to circle back to the victims in this case.
Right.
We've talked a lot about Dorothy Williams' story.
Yes.
But what about the people whose lives she took?
Yeah, it's really crucial to remember the victims in this case.
Yeah.
Lonnie Laws, Cesar Zarell, and Mary Harris.
Right.
Their lives were tragically cut short.
Yeah.
And their families continue to live with that loss.
It's a reminder that every case, every headline we see
Yeah,
represents real people
absolutely.
who suffered unimaginable pain.
Yes.
What can we learn from their experiences?
Well, I think their stories underscore the need for greater awareness
Okay.
about elder abuse
Right.
and the importance of, creating support systems to protect
Yeah.
vulnerable populations.
So this isn't just about one woman's crimes.
No.
It's about addressing larger societal issues.
Exactly. We need to ask ourselves,
Yeah.
how can we better support people who are struggling with addiction?
Right.
How can we better protect the elderly?
Right.
And how can we create a justice system
Yeah.
that's fair and equitable for everyone?
Those are some heavy questions.
They are.
But they're ones we can't ignore.
We can't.
Well, this has been,
Yeah,
this deep dive into Dorothy Williams' case has been a journey
it has.
through some darkness, for sure.
Yes,
But it's also illuminated some complex issues
it has.
that we as a society need to confront.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground here today.
We have.
Addiction, crime, punishment, and all those ripple effects on individuals and communities.
Right.
But what strikes me the most is that there are just no easy answers.
Well, that's the thing about these complex situations.
Yeah.
There's rarely a simple solution
Right.
or a clear-cut, villain. It's all about understanding the nuances.
Yeah.
Grappling with those ethical dilemmas.
Of course.
And just striving to create a better future.
That's a good way to put it. I think this case really raises questions
does.
that linger long after we're done talking about it.
Absolutely.
How do we balance accountability with compassion?
Right.
How do we address those systemic issues that contribute to these tragedies?
Important questions.
And how do we as individuals even make a difference?
Yeah.
These are things we all need to be thinking about.
I agree. I encourage you, the listener, to continue exploring these questions.
Yeah.
Do your own research, learn and engage in thoughtful discussions.
Right.
Your voice, your actions,
Yeah.
they can contribute to positive change.
Well, thank you for joining us for this intense
Yeah.
and thought-provoking deep dive
Yeah, it was a good one.
into the case of Dorothy Williams.
Absolutely.
We hope it sparked some important conversations
I think so.
and left you with more to ponder. Keep asking questions. Stay curious. Until next time.
See you then.